Today, I'm deeply honored to have as a guest Dr. Bill Werner, an expert in political Islam, author of many books, and also the founder of the Center for the Study of Political Islam. Happy New Year, Dr. Bill Werner. We will be posting the links to his site and his social media in the description below this video, so you can visit and peruse the materials you find there. Happy New Year, Dr. Bill Werner. What is the same this year, and what has changed, and what do we have to look forward to as Islam is spreading across Europe, and there's no news of that? The new attacks in even New York City on Christmas Eve, Christmas Day. What are we seeing happening with the Hijra in this new year already?
Well, it's a repetition of what we've been seeing for the last decade. It's amazing, but, well, here we are in the United States. We can't even agree to stop people at our southern border, which everybody knows is a problem. So we seem to be in sort of a state of paralysis, a deep depression. We seem to have lost our mooring. We don't know where we're headed or why we're going that way. It's difficult to be optimistic, but we do need to say that there is some chance for optimism. We are, since 9/11, we have learned a great deal. Now, these people who've learned a lot aren't at the top. I say that when it comes to Islam, the higher you go, the less they know. And I said this because I was talking to some sergeant who was in Afghanistan, and he understood more about the war than the generals did. So we have some grassroots development is what I'm saying, and that's been very good. There are more people now. On September 11th, 2001, there wasn't really anybody who knew a Hindu from a Sikh, from a Buddhist, from anything else. But now then, people do understand there's a difference. So I don't want to be too pessimistic, because a warrior, and this is an ideological war, his best weapon is his morale. So we need to think like winners. As a matter of fact, I'm just finishing up a book now. All my books to this point have been about the doctrine of political Islam. This is the first book I've ever written in which it's talking about what we need to do about it, how to work together as a group. So it's a strategic book and a tactical book. So basically, we're not taking any of this very seriously, which is too bad, because it's a civilizational war. And I say Muhammad was the greatest warrior who ever lived, because he came up with the concept of civilizational war. What we see is Islam advances across all fronts: schools, textbooks, college professors. So they play the game brilliantly, and we don't even realize there's a game to be played.
You're saying he's the greatest general and the greatest tactician, and look at the success of his total program. It's lasted, these 1,300 years, and he has people convinced that he was around as an Abrahamic faith prior to the birth of Christ. I mean, that's how successful this ideology has been in spreading throughout the world and throughout time. There's really, the success of the message of Jesus Christ is obviously greater and has spread further. But now I'm getting to my question. One of the things we talked about last week was precisely the way that Islam has successfully infiltrated the churches.
Well,
when you visit, do you have any special insight into that? Or
it's
feelings?
a tragedy. I've stood in churches and excuse me. I've stood in churches and said, correct me if I'm wrong, but does not the scriptures command you to care for the persecuted Christians? I believe it does. Yet this congregation here, who have you seen that comes from Africa who's been persecuted? Who do you see from the Middle East that's come to your church to speak of their persecution in the Middle East? It's not done. And let me give you an example. A man from Australia who has converted over 1,000 Muslims to Christianity. That's pretty impressive. Came to my house. He made a trip from Australia to the United States, and he came to my house, and I issued a call for a meeting to talk to this man who's been enormously successful. And I think it was a total of 4 people show up.
Oh,
These are Christians. And here's a man that's saying, I can teach you to convert Muslims. You ask the church, have you ever converted a Muslim before? No. Nor do they seem to be very uninterested about that. So
it's an interesting power relationship when so many of the churches, I'll speak from personal experience here in Rochester, Minnesota, are ceded territory, and that they'll have routinely members representing the mosque. Of course, if you call Lutheran Social Services, it's a Muslim woman who answers the phone. So, in spite of being a very small percentage of the population, they're really seated in the right places. Or on the other hand, if they're involved with, say, the Feeding Our Future nonprofit scam in Rochester, we've had 4 Department of Justice indictments handed down, and those Islamic businessmen are still in business. Nothing's happened to them to cause any difficulty. That's $250 million a year across the state of Minnesota in fraud, waste, and abuse. But political Islam has that brilliant ability to insert itself. They identify the centers of power, and then they infiltrate and then change and destroy. So churches is just one of those that they're working on. I mean, of course, city councils and so forth. And what in the coming year, where might be their next approach? What other areas have they already taken over?
Well, they're going to continue doing what they're doing. Their attitude, of course, is it ain't broke, don't fix it, because what they're doing is winning. For instance, the textbooks here in Tennessee portray Islam as the greatest of world civilizations. That simply isn't true. But there doesn't seem to be anybody who can stand up and say it's not true. They say that Christians are people of the book, and that basically they're all a member of the same Abrahamic faith. And Christians are like, well, yeah, that sounds really great to us. The Christians that I see don't want to win, they want to tie. Let me ask you a question. You have 2 teams playing, one wants to win and the other wants to tie. Who's going to win?
Yeah, the one that wants to win is going to win.
Right. And the Muslims have an excellent morale. Why shouldn't they? They're on a roll. We have city council people here in Nashville, and we have Congress people. We'll soon have a senator and a governor. I don't know when, but it'll happen. And everybody seems to be like, well, see, this just shows how tolerant we are.
Right.
Let me tell you something.
We're more virtuous because we're more tolerant. It's a virtue signal, isn't it? Yeah. They claim that they feel more virtuous because they're demonstrating their tolerance, but
right.
The school boards
are tolerance will lead to intolerance.
I had 4 minutes to speak at a school board meeting, and then an Islamist was given over 20 minutes to speak. So I guess that's my supremacy in motion.
Well, here in Tennessee, we have a Republican governor who's supposed to be a conservative. The Muslim Brotherhood has gotten meetings with him as often as they want, but I can't have a meeting with him.
Is this term Islamophobia still useful, or have we sort of done away with that? Are you still hearing that?
I think it is amazingly useful. There are people who would rather give up their home, house, and country than be called a bigot or an Islamophobe. So it's more successful than I thought. I'm old school. I was raised with the sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. Turns out most people aren't like that anymore. They're terrified of being called an Islamophobe because they'll be ostracized. And I've been told in face-to-face meetings by religious people that I'm a bigot, a hate-filled bigot. And all I'm doing is quoting their scripture. That's the most amazing thing.
Isn't that fascinating? Because you can actually get banned off of social media platforms for simply posting a quote from the Koran.
Yes, this has been done.
I wonder if the censors and the bots inside social media, especially Facebook, have figured out a way to scan the accounts of Islamists who are posting what they're doing to Christians in Europe. Because if you dig deep enough, you'll find those posts of two men having sex with the statue of the Virgin of Mary in the cathedral, or other people, other men knocking over Christian tombstones and chopping the crosses off the top of World War I and World War II uh, uh, tombstones, and breaking religious objects, and basically causing murder and mayhem. They post these videos themselves, okay? And they get away with it. They're not censored. They're not kicked off the platform. They make videos of themselves doing these things in Germany or in England, and in the streets, setting things on fire. And there's no consequences for their actions. So
No,
I'm astonished. Christmas Day, Christmas Eve, when you had thousands of Islamists uh, marching in the streets in Manhattan, uh, if you saw any other group of people doing that, you'd pay attention, right?
mm-hmm.
That's some awesome privileges. The
We'll
privilege.
tolerate anything and be
No,
proud of it.
I interrupted. You were saying we'll tolerate anything, and they'll use Christianity to tell us we need to tolerate anything as well.
Correct.
I like it. Sarcasm. I'm always interested when non-Christians dictate to Christians how Christians are supposed to behave and what Christians are supposed to believe.
What gets me is that a lot of Christians listen to them.
That's a fact. How about school boards and these textbooks? So we're seeing that here in ISD 535, just blatant errors as regards to Islam being taught in the books. And it's there seems to be no way to countermand what are you hearing about the school board meetings? Are you hearing from teachers as you move forward with your new book? Do you have any space in there for education?
Yes, basically, we'll win this war through education. It turns out that when the average person knows the truth about Muhammad, they're horrified. We don't have to make any comment. In my books, in my talks, I never condemn Muslims. I never condemn Muhammad. I just say, here's what he did. So it's all about education. And this, which is what I'm about. We're in a
Fantastic.
civilizational war, but that doesn't mean a war of bullets and bombs.
No.
It means a war of ideas.
Yeah. The bullets and the bombs haven't worked very well. The endless wars have just depleted our resources, cost us money, cost us men and material. But the information war, the metaphorical war, the ideological war, like you say, once you show people the actual belief systems, you show them the Sharia, show them the Quran, then they're horrified. How do we
Yes.
how do we do that? Where do we place that information? At school board meetings or city council meetings, or how do we proceed?
Well, any stage you can get, because you never know what will be. One of the most effective meetings I ever had was two people came to a talk. So there's a small number, but it turned out one of those people turned out to be very much of an activist. And I sort of turned him on to the whole idea. So we need to take any stage we can get. It's just what is at hand. I have an organization, Center for the Study of Political Islam International, that is primarily active in Europe. Why Europe? Because they're about 10 years ahead of us. So we're able to train police forces, military, whereas we, for instance, were in Afghanistan for 20 years with 18 generals. We never once asked the question, who's the enemy and why are they fighting us? Never once. When it was the Cold War, we did train our soldiers in communism, Das Kapital, and all the rest of it, Marxism, so they'd have an idea as to how the enemy thought. We have no idea. We were in Afghanistan, like I say, 20 years. We have no idea. Why are they doing this?
Some of the training may have been counterproductive to when the training for the U.S. military and the other departments shifted gears toward explaining that Islam is a religion of peace. And some of that reality became like a perverted public relations campaign. And I've met some veterans who received that training, and they have a lot of wrong ideas about Islam. But that was interesting to build compassion. But I never wanted us to invade those areas of the world to begin with. We shouldn't have been there. We didn't know why we were there, and we didn't know, as you say, we didn't know who we were fighting.
No. I'll give you an example. What's going on today? We have the so-called Hamas-Israeli war. It is jihad, pure and simple.
Yeah, the trophy for best actor at playing the victim goes to Hamas.
Well, Muhammad was always the victim.
You're right.
He was never wrong. He was always the victim.
He really played that up in Medina, got access to the city, and then a year later, all of the Jews and Christians were dead or converted, right?
The problem is we don't seem to have learned anything.
We celebrate Ramadan with Islam. We don't know that that was a celebration of the victory in battle, the Battle of Badr, right?
Right,
Doctor?
correct.
Yeah. So Jews and Christians massacred, and we're all celebrating Islam right there along with the Islamists. Do you think they're surprised at how dumb we are on our side? Do you think they ever like shake their heads and just, wow, we really got it easy. These people are really doe-like. They're fawns, right? Do you think they ever
No.
pinch
What they
themselves?
see is that this is all the work of Allah. This is just proof that they're on the right side.
Because Allah is the great deceiver, one of the names
Right.
of Allah, the greatest of all deceivers.
Right. So
Perfect.
they see it as, well, the shortest hadith is war is deception. Muhammad was very aware of that. So they just see all of this ease, that all this, they're pushing against an open door. This is just proof Allah is, they're doing his work.
And taqiyya is the deception that you're allowed to use with non-believers in the furtherance of the goals of your hijrah or your campaign. So if you need to lie to unbelievers in order to get the upper hand in any situation, you're allowed to do that. So it makes the Department of Justice, yeah. So everything with the feeding our future fraud, we deserve that. And it's a miracle that Allah provides, barakallah. Allah provides their sustenance that they can then ship back to Juba land or Somalia or somewhere else. They can take what they can plunder. It's all excusable. With the Houthi boats, the Houthi or Houthi, depending, if with the Houthi fishermen making the Red Sea virtually a no-go zone in this new year, so early in this new year, are you looking at that as kind of interesting that the United States hasn't responded to that much at all? I mean, we've had some bombings and some attacks, but they aren't very fruitful. But
I think
don't.
somewhere, even in the Pentagon, they're realizing that we've got too many wars going on. We don't need one more because we're being stretched very thin. It's interesting to study the Roman Empire because they too stretched themselves too thin. War had treated them very nicely for centuries, but all of a sudden they had too many wars going on, constant fighting. So,
And they had the enemy inside the gates in Rome. They had brought in too many foreigners to their military, and they had the enemy inside Italy, inside Rome, as their guards, their Praetorian. You know, you'd bring in the conquered people were just too many inside the government, inside Rome.
this is
And
all true.
the parallels are astonishing, right down to the behavior of the young men and the young women. A good reading of Edward Gibbon, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, would be in order at this point for the
Brooke
new
has the
year.
wrong title. It should be the Rise and Fall by Rot. It just rots down the same way our house is rotting down. There's two kinds of jihad. There's many kinds of jihad, but one kind of jihad is just rot, burrowing inside of the organizations, and that's what we're doing. And like I say, we applaud ourselves because we're rotten.
Right, right. Things are getting so bad that we can't even see how bad things are. When you've got machete attacks and knife attacks, so forth, happening, on a regular basis inside American cities, and nobody can understand. Nobody could. Why did this one guy hack of his three of his women with a machete? Well, we've got to give him some community service. Uh, we've got to put him on probation. We've got to be tolerant. It's a different culture. Why are they cutting and scarifying the little girls? So forth. I mean, Happy New Year. It just goes on. But
Right.
they did it right in our faces, and as you see it happening across the United States now, similarly to how it happened in France and England, people are becoming numb to it. In Rochester, we have a situation where an Islamist impregnated a 6-year-old child. And I think he's doing 2 years in jail and or probation, but that's just not a shocking crime anymore. There was another case of an Islamist having, well, anyway, I don't want to list all of those. They're gross. But as these things occur, nobody's really shocked. There's no outrage.
Well, I've condemned the churches, but what are we to do with the so-called feminist leaders? What have they got to say about it? They're
Where are
tolerant
they?
as well. Tolerant of raping a 6-year-old.
They use the word misogyny toward their political enemies. But when it's happening right in their ranks, where are the feminists? Where are the women who led these anti-trafficking campaigns? Groups like Take Back the Night, uh, uh, Mission 21. We used to have all of these groups that were like, there was one called Minnesota Girls Are Not for Sale. But all of these groups just seem to have melted away with the advent of the LGBTQRS alphabet movement, of course, which is normalizing sexuality for children, but also Islam needs access to those young females. So we need to tolerate, I suppose, child marriage and the formation of harems, because if it continues as it has the last 1,300 years, that's where we're headed in North America.
all I got to do is watch the news, as much news as you can watch. The mainstream media is as, excuse me, mainstream media, the mainstream media is as corrupt as the churches and the women's movement. It's like we've lost our gumption. That's a very old-fashioned word. Many people listening to this may not know what it is, but we've lost our gumption, backbone. When this all started out, I was very concerned with my safety, but I was talking with an Egyptian Christian who said, they respect you, Muslims do, because you don't insult Muhammad, you don't insult anybody, but you stand for what you stand. And says, and this is true, the only thing that the Muslim is to respect in the Kafir is strength. He said, they won't bother you because, first off, you become politically too much of a problem if they do, but says, basically, they have a certain amount of respect for you.
Funny you should mention that. You brought up the memory of how eventually it was so easy to bring down one of the chief apologists for Islam here in Rochester, an apologist who was so successful in, she even ran for U.S. Congress and ran for mayor of our town. And she was a white Catholic girl from Croydon, Pennsylvania, who converted to Islam on her worldly travels, that moved here. And I was just perplexed. I could never get her to come down to a real discussion of Sharia and the Quran. So finally, in the end, I just approached the men of this community, the men of Islam, and I just said to them, we have, as a leader of the mosque, a graduate of the University of Cairo, one of the most respected Sharia universities, the jewel on the crown of Islamic thought in the world, and you send a woman to talk to us. Why do you hide behind a woman? And do you know that she was pulled off the stage immediately? Because it's a tactic of Sun Tzu, or even the CIA. You use what's dominant in a culture to flip it or change it. So
Right.
once I identify, I just said, hey, there you have the key. And I went to the men of Islam and I embarrassed them for sending us a woman to parlay. And then they realized she wasn't very effective anymore. So I just hammered on that and she disappeared. Do you think there's something we can do where we can find the point to place the crowbar, the fulcrum, so we can get some leverage on this finally in education moving forward?
I tell you, one of the things we need to do is to have some sort of organization. Not, sorry, I'm not doing well this morning. We need an organization that is, it could be on the web, but we need some way of being with each other, because people don't want to tackle this alone. The number of people who will tackle this alone are very few. So that's one of the things we need. We need a website that's based on connecting people, sort of a community website, so that people who want to do things, there's all kinds of things you might do. For instance, if you're a Christian, on Sunday, put a leaflet under all the windshield wipers in the parking lot, talking about what we're doing with regards to Islam. So there's many things that can be done, but we need to have a group to work with, because most people don't have the gumption to tackle it on their own. There's an amazing man in California who takes a card table and sets it up in malls. It turns out that the California Supreme Court has said that malls are the equivalent of a public space. And he stands there and hands out brochures. He'll hand out 500 or 600 a day. That's astounding. Now he gets one or two people to come with him, but he is very effective to handing out these brochures. So there's all kinds of things that can be done. I think it's important just to start and do one that's easy for you. For instance, if you're a Christian, there's a lot of work to be done.
Thank you for ending on a positive note, on an inspirational note, because we really don't want to be doomers and gloomers here 100%. We don't want to sell any hopium, but we don't want to dull people down with the drudgery of this work. And I'm going to say a good start toward everyone getting educated and up to date is to visit Dr. Bill Werner's website, the Center for the Study of Political Islam. I'll post the link in the description below this video. Everybody be sure to go there and take a look at the many books and pamphlets and ideas, and there's informational videos you can watch as well. There's a plethora of topics. You can really get educated by visiting that website. Dr. Werner, it's been too long. Let's do this again much sooner. Please,
We
sir.
can do it. Thank you for
Thank
the
you.
invitation.
Thank you. We'll see you next time, sir.
Bye.
Bye-bye.